Good day. This is the first of the pre recorded lectures you will have in the next 5 weeks, where we consider reading and writing. The course presentation and outline is presented in an earlier letter, and this is the presentation section for the first part. And we begin specifically with the concept of no read, no write. This is the principle that we will look into. And before we implement any protocols in the research process. So, welcome to the principle no read, no write, reading as a research superpower. This phrase might sound simple, maybe even obvious, but over the next several hours, I want to show you how profound it really is. Writing, good, clear, publishable, persuasive research writing is never an act of pure invention. It is always downstream from reading. Every sentence you craft, every argument you build, every claim you make rests on a foundation of what you have read, absorbed, and understood. So the rule is firm. If you haven't read enough, you can't write well enough. So here, no, uh, the rule is firm. Throughout today's lecture workshops, we'll build a systematic way of reading that strengthens your writing. How to find the right papers, how to triage them, how to read with depth and purpose, and how to transform all that reading into actual contributions to scholarship. And that's why I'd like you to treat today not as just a lecture, but as a working paper, working session. Keep a paper, keep a digital notebook or your laptop available, and we will pause frequently for reflection, for short writing tasks, or for small group discussions. And everything we do today should feed into your current or even upcoming writing projects. This is very important, especially as we move forward. So, the fundamental truth underpinning all successful research writing is that quality writing is always downstream of quality reading. Quality reading requires breadth of context, depth for rigor, and synthesis even for meaningful contribution. Research writing isn't just invention from scratch. It's reassembled reading. It's structured citation, careful critique, and thoughtful synthesis of existing scholarship. Your writing can only be as strong as the foundation of reading that supports it. So, what will we study throughout the day? So, first, we have to design repeatable workflows. Even the session this afternoon, the second session for today, will focus on really creating a schedule, creating a habit for writing. By designing repeatable workflows, I suggest that we build a literature system that scales from quick triage to deep comprehension, adaptable to any research contexts. Second, to be able to appraise scholarly work, evaluate credibility, relevance, and novelty of research across disciplines with confidence and even precision. And lastly, transform reading into writing. We read in order to write. That's why if we haven't read, we cannot write. No, that's the principle that I was pushing forward, and it's a very fundamental principle. No, therefore we have to be able to convert structured notes, literature maps, and argument scaffolds directly or more consciously into powerful prose. So, of course, we'll look at ethical citation practices also by trying to master paraphrasing, no, synthesizing, and even attribution without plagiarism, and to understand the ethical dimension of scholarly conversation, and then to push forward for sustainable research cadence, no, establish a weekly reading, thinking, writing rhythm that prevents burnout while maintaining productivity and even quality. This is something we will see more in the second lecture than here. Okay, so let's begin with the principle and mindset. Principle and mindset. So let's start at the foundation. Research is as reassembled reading. Research is reassembled reading. I emphasize that. Think about it. When you publish a paper, you are not simply recording your thoughts. You are entering a conversation that has been going on long before you and will even continue long after. Your contribution is meaningful only if it is positioned in that ongoing dialogue. That requires careful listening first. And in the academia, listening means reading. This is why strong papers don't just cite sources. They demonstrate mastery of the intellectual landscape. They show what is known, what is contested, and what remains missing. Now, here's the hard truth. Many weak papers collapse because of insufficient reading. Circular drafts happen when writers are trying to answer a question without fully understanding what's already been said. Scope creep emerges when writers are unaware of boundaries others have already drawn. And those dreaded reviewer comments, has not engaged with X, are the symptoms of poor reading foundations, which we have to pay attention to. So, as we said, no, research writing is fundamentally reassembled reading, and that's what you have to pay attention to. No, lack of writing reveals gaps in your reading, and therefore reading isn't simply preliminary work. It's the continuous foundation of all research writing. And that's something you have to pay attention to and even take seriously. When you read, what are you actually trying to find out? To anchor us, I want you to adopt three pillars of scholarly reading. One, context. Where does this fit? Every study sits within a tradition. Every paper sits within a tradition, a debate, or a body of literature, never objective. No? So that when you read about different schools like behaviorism, or whether you read about a Montessori system, these are all traditions, debates, or a system of literature. Reading with context means constantly asking, how does this piece connect to the wider conversation? Or what genealogy of ideas do I trace myself to? Does it belong to? What assumptions is it making about the field and the like? Uh, like I'm trained in philosophy, but more specifically, I'm trained in the phenomenological tradition of philosophy. That's part of the continental tradition, not of the analytic tradition. So, context, you need to know where you trace yourself to. Uh, Second, credibility. Can these be trusted? Not all publishable work is equally rigorous. Because it's published, it doesn't mean it's okay. Some designs are stronger than others. Some journals uphold higher editorial standards. Some analyses are transparent and replicable, others are just not. You need the skills to read critically, skeptically, and distinguishing between robust evidence and fragile claims. Credibility. Next, contribution. What changes if this is true? You have to remember that every serious piece of scholarship aims to shift something, a theory, a method, a practice, or a policy. Your task as a reader is to identify what difference this work makes if we accept its claims. Contribution is the beating heart of research. Contribution is the beating heart of research. So let's pause a bit before we move to the next point. No? Let's pause. Reading death audit. Reading death audit. Take a moment and choose a writing project you're working on or one you'll begin real soon. Article, perhaps. It could be, and this journal article is the required output for this class anyway. Step one, write down the project. Step two, map the territory. List out all the subdomains, theoretical perspective, methodological traditions you think you must speak to or work with. And step three, for each subdomain, you are to estimate how many high quality sources you should engage with. Maybe 5 in one area, 10 in another. Multiply breadth by depth. Lawak sa lalim. That's your minimum viable reading set. Lastly, now compare that to what you've actually read so far. Where are the largest gaps? Take about 10 minutes to do this silently. Just sit down. If you didn't get the instructions, there's a reason why this video is recorded. You can play it again or rewind it a little bit. So take about 10 minutes to do this silently, but specifically ask yourself, did you discover that the actual reading is far smaller than what the project requires? Or did you realize that you have overread in one area or underread in another? Let's surface those patterns and let's process them. what you've done so far is something few researchers do explicitly, quantifying quantifying their reading debt. Like financial debt, it has to be paid eventually. The earlier you pay it by doing the right reading before you write, the stronger and more efficient your writing process will be. This principle will guide us for the rest of these course. And next, we'll turn to the anatomy of scholarly papers themselves, how to read them strategically, section by section, asking the right questions at the right time. So, uh, let's move on and look at uh, writing as a lagging indicator. No, so this is so strong papers, as I said a while ago, don't just cite. You have to be able to demonstrate the depth, your familiarity with the intellectual landscape. Uh, and therefore, a good paper will show what's known so far, what's contested, or more importantly, what's missing in the in what's missing. Your writing will reflect this depth, and a researcher who read widely and deeply brings this precision to problem framing, to nuancing literature review, to sophisticating interpretation. Conversely, thin reading produces vague claims, missed connections, and even vulnerable arguments. So, how much reading is enough? Depends, no? Reading requirement scale is possible. So, if you're writing a journal article, just as I have suggested, it's this level. You have to read 40 to 80 works covering depth, and breadth, no? But if this is going to be your thesis, it's gonna be 60 to 200 carefully selected works. And if it's a dissertation, about 200 to 500 plus sources to demonstrate your knowledge, no? So this is the activity that I spoke about a while ago. And we go now to paper anatomy. This one, paper anatomy. This is the next phase that I promised to talk about today. So now that we've grounded ourselves in the principle of no read, no write. It's like a foundation. Huh? Remember, it's like a foundation where you build the structure, which is your writing, your outlines. No foundation, no structure. No? So now that we've grounded ourselves in the principle of no read, no write, let's talk about how to actually approach a paper. Too many researchers treat papers like novels, reading line by line from start to finish, hoping to absorb something useful. That's the slowest, least strategic way to engage. Remember, every scholarly paper has an internal architecture designed to serve rhetorical purposes, which basically means if you understand the anatomy, you can navigate strategically, extracting what you need with purpose. Think of an empirical paper. It's usually follows the IMRAD structure: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Surrounding surrounding that are supporting sections, title, abstract, literature review, limitations, conclusions, references. But each section exists to answer a specific kind of question. So when you open your paper, when you open a paper, don't ask what the paper is about. There are sections, no? There are standard sections, in fact, that you have to pay attention to. First, title, what is the central claim? What population or data set? Why does this matter? Introduction, what gap motivates this study? What theory frame organizes it? Or what's genuinely new? Uh, or literature review, what camp exists? What are the perspectives? Which controversies? What's missing? Or even what's misrepresented? Methods. Is this design capable of answering the question? Or are discussions transparent? Could I replicate these? Results, what changed? Or how certain are we? What is the effect size? And remember, we're not just interested with the p-value, and I'll comment on that in a bit. Or the discussion, do claims match evidence? Were alternative explanation considered? Or how do these findings connect to the bigger picture? No? Uh, it ends with discussion here, but of course, there's more to that. Limitations, are weaknesses acknowledged honestly? Do they matter materially? And conclusion, what follows for practice, theory, and future work? You can look at it more here, no? Title and abstract, what is the central claim? What population or data? Why does this matter now? No? The abstract is your decision point, actually. Should tell you immediately whether this paper deserves 10 more minutes of your attention or not. No? For the introduction and the literature review, these are the two things that we've considered: the gap, the theoretical frame, no? What is new here, uh, the literature review, the controversies, the camps, what's missing, are key citations current and appropriate? For methods and results, is the design capable of answering the question, the thesis statement? Look beyond mere descriptions here. Are assumptions transparent? Look at the results, what actually changed and how certain are we? Focus on the effect sizes, not just p-values. Discussion and limitations there. Do claims match evidences? Are there alternative explanations? Acknowledge honesty. Are limitations acknowledged? Do they matter? So these are very important things to consider. So let's practice. Open one paper that is relevant to your planned topic. For example, you wanted to write on religious education, specifically on teaching liturgy, no? So look for a paper, journal article that is related to your topic. It cannot be very general, as in liturgy only, no? You will not end in anything there that way. You have to be very specific, huh? And then when you look at the paper, for each section, write one answerable question. For example, under methods, is the sampling strategy representative? Or under discussion, do they claim too much from limited data? And when you are finished, circle the 3 most important insights you gained. Which sections revealed the most value? Which sections felt weakest? And how might you adjust your own writing, knowing how readers will interrogate each part? Those are very important, no? Those are very important. So, finding and triage, no? Efficient discovery and filtering. It's good as saying you don't have to read everything, no? You don't have to read everything, no? Now let's imagine you're building your reading list. Where do you start? That's the question that many of you might be asking. Why is he talking about reading? Where do I start? No? Too many people rely on random Google Scholar searches, Wikipedia, or whatever their advisor or whoever hands them. That's just inefficient. Instead, you need a repeatable discovery pipeline. This pipeline has four very important stages: query, filter, triage, and shortlist. Okay? Let's look at that one by one. So, effective literature begins with well-constructed queries. You have to master Boolean operators. And there are three, right? And, or, not, phrase matching with quotes and synonym expansions through wildcards or controlled vocabularies. Your search strategy should balance precision and recall, finding what matters without drowning in noise. You have to apply filters strategically. Year ranges focus on recent work, not older than 5 years, while allowing foundational classics. Document type separates peer-reviewed articles from fishing or even gray literature. Venue quality indicators such as impact factor, H-index, Shimago rankings help prioritize which works are important. And open access filters ensures you can actually read what you find. So, so use Boolean equations. Do not forget phrase matching, synonyms, controlled vocabularies. Think of multiple variations, broad for coverage, narrow for precision. No? And then filter. Year ranges to capture recent work, document types, venue quality, open access availability, and things like that. Then you apply the 10-10-10. No? What's the 10-10-10 rule? 10-second title scheme, discard ruthlessly. Don't feel that it's sayang. 10-minute abstract plus figures plus conclusion scan, keep or drop. 10-point checklist, only the strongest survive to deep reading. That's very important. You do not read everything, no? So the title scheme scans titles rapidly, keep only those clearly relevant, discard the rest without guilt. This filter should eliminate 60 to 80% of your downloaded journal articles. 10-minute strategic scan for keepers, read abstract thoroughly, examine figures and tables, read conclusion. This reveals the actual contribution and methodological approach. Another 50% get eliminated here. And then 10-point shortlist checklist, surviving papers get evaluated systematically against quality criteria. Only the strongest advance to keep reading. And this final filter creates your core reading set. So let's look at that checklist. No? So what is the checklist? The 10-point checklist. Relevance to your question, venue credibility, novelty, methodological fit, transparency, ethical compliance, replicability, contribution, diversity. It's not 10, it's 8 lang pala. Remember, you're not trying to read everything. You're trying to build a curated core reading set that will eventually fuel your writing. Let's look at these 8 criteria one by one. No? First, uh, relevance. That which addresses, so there are 10 criteria. So I'm correct. 10. Bakit kanina 8 lang bilang ko? Whether a paper deserves deep reading. One, addresses your research question, population, or theoretical framework specifically. Connect, right? Second, published in recognized peer-reviewed outlet with appropriate editorial standards. These you have to take into consideration. Third, novelty or importance offers new findings, challenges, and assumptions, or is widely cited as foundational. One, two, three, four, five. One, two, three, four. Methodological fit. Uses approaches relevant to your own methods or provides instructive contrast. Six, transparency. Provides sufficient detail to evaluate claims and potentially replicate. And then additional, diba? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 8 lang talaga. 10 ka dyan. Sorry, I have to edit this one because I said 10 here, but there's only 8. Ethical compliance there. Meet standards for research ethics, informed consent, data protection, and conflicts of intellect disclosures, and red flags here invalidate the work. You have to understand. That's how important the research ethics protocols are. Replicability provides data, code, materials, or sufficient procedural detail that findings could be verified. Here, we have to increase standard in many fields, or an increasing standard in many fields. Uh, Contribution diversity balances confirmatory and contradictory evidence, represents diverse theoretical perspective, uh, and methodological traditions. No? So let's look at our activity. So now we come to one of the most powerful techniques. Sorry. Pick one seed paper. No? Something central to your project. No? There has to be your initial draft or something you're already working with. Kung wala, ibang usapan yon. No? You have to presume there is, for example. First, do backward snowballing. Look at its references and choose 3 more to read. No? Then forward snowballing. See who cited it and select 3 newer works. You now have at least 6 papers organically linked in the conversation. For each, write down why you're keeping it, what role will it play, a method you might use, a theory you must engage, a contradictory result you must reconcile. But by the end, you'll see that your list is intentional and not simply accidental. Intentional and not simply accidental. Now, multi-pass reading. This is the next phase from orientation to mastery. Orientation to mastery. Now, we've come to one of the most powerful techniques in reading, multi-pass reading. No, I've thought that it's also important to still teach you how to read because just maybe, and I'm not assuming, but I just assume, yes, just maybe you're not used to reading. So many researchers, you have to understand, waste hours trying to master every detail of a paper on their first try. But not every paper deserves that level of investment. You need a layered strategy, deciding how much time to give based on value. And there are 3, right? And it's in front of you. the three passes that you have to take into consideration, no? So pass one, orientation, pass two, structure and claims, pass three, deep dive. Let's look at pass one. Pass one is the orientation, should not be longer than 10 to 15 minutes. So read the abstract fully, scan all figures and tables, read the conclusion carefully, and then glance at section headings. Your outcome is to decide whether to discard, bookmark, or shortlist. Now, that's the outcome for the pass one. Now, pass two. This is those papers you have decided to read, to shortlist even. So 30 to 45 minutes. Read the introduction carefully, skim the methods to grasp design and sample, focus on key results sections, read the discussion in full. Your outcome, you have to write 5-sentence structured summary. Question, write a summary of the question, the method, the findings, the conclusions, and the significance. This is going to be your reusable note. And past 2 to 4 hours is your deep dive. Here you have to read methods line by line. Try to understand what they're doing. Rederive equations or replicate logic. Scrutinize results for their robustness, and identify assumptions, omissions, and threats to validity. Your outcome here is a complete mastery where you have enough to critique, to replicate, and even to extend. No? So sorry, I didn't move the slides. So, three passes. Uh, of course, none of this matters if you don't capture your insights, and therefore notes should be reusable, not dead end highlights, no? So dapat you have a notebook, no? I always carry a notebook. Some systems include concept matrices, papers and themes. Other notebooks have evidence tables, design, samples, findings. Some have claim, evidence, warrant logs, no? What they claim, evidence, why it matters. Or you can actually look into the Zettelkasten atomic notes, one idea per note, and then to link it to others. That's very important also to consider. Okay? Now, third activity, no? Let's try. Pick one paper now. Do a second pass reading and write a 5-sentence summary. Then ask yourself, is my summary accurate? Is the brevity respected? Does it capture contribution? Could someone unfamiliar with the paper understand its value from your summary alone? Now let's look at appraising evidence. Appraising evidence. Up to this point, we've been asking, what does this paper say? Now we must go further and ask, can I trust it? Reading critically is not just about comprehension. It's also about appraisal. Every design carries strengths and weaknesses. And your job as a reader is to identify where the evidence is strong and where it is vulnerable. So let's consider major design types. No? There are four in front of you. Randomized controlled trials or RCTs. This is the gold standard for causal inference, but often limited in generalizability. But the RCTs remains to be the gold standard. The observational studies, which focuses on real-world relevance, but confounded by hidden variables. The qualitative researches, very rich contextual insights, but of course will depend on rigor of interpretation or even of the author's reflexivity, or what we call the computational studies, which handle massive data sets but raise questions of algorithmic transparency, bias, and reproducibility. No? So when you read these types of work, no, you have to apply four lenses. And in a way, this is a review of your research class if you're familiar already with research. But when you read, you have to apply four lenses. And what are these four lenses? Uh, so what are these four lenses that you have to consider? Construct validity. Are we measuring what we think we're measuring? That's the first one. Second, internal validity. Are causal claims warranted or are other explanations possible? External validity. Do findings generalize beyond the sample? And statistical validity. Are analysis appropriate and are assumptions met? Of course, these four validity lenses operates on the understanding that you have a very deep understanding of the research process. That's why you also have to consider common threats to these validity, no? Uh, Common threats include, for example, confounding, selection bias, measurement error, P, hacking, overfitting, publication bias, and confirmation bias in qualitative work. But for computational or machine learning studies, you have to look for their fairness audits, reproducibility packages, and even data representativeness. No? So it's not going to be easy because there are more to it, no? So for qualitative rigor, so if this is threats, if these threats happen more in quantitative research, uh, we can look at qualitative rigor also in terms of reflexivity, that you acknowledge your position, assumption, and biases. The thick description to assess transferability, triangulation, that there are multiple sources that cross verifies each other, and a very clear audit trail. No? Uh, for computational researches, as I was saying a while ago, uh, you have to look for fairness audits, reproducibility packages, and also data representativeness. Now let's look at these exercise. No? Choose a paper you've read recently that makes a very strong claim. Now, You have to when the paper makes a strong claim, you need to identify three potential validity threats. And you have to be very specific. Don't just write confounding. Explain which variable might confound. You have to assess severity. Is it a minor issue or does it undermine the entire study? And finally, you have to propose one mitigation per threat. The goal is to be critical and skeptical, but also constructive. Hindi yung maninira ka lang, no? Yung ibang mga tao, mahilig lang ganyan, masira lang ng mga papel, pero hindi naman nagpe-prescribe ng ways of moving forward. Delikado rin yun, no? Now, let's go to interpreting results. No? So this is still part of being creative about the paper. And so next, let's talk about results. Many readers stop at p-values. Don't. Just don't. Uh, statistically, uh, statistically significance statistical significance only tells you that something is unlikely due to chance. But it doesn't tell you whether it matters. And that's something you have to pay attention. It doesn't always follow that way. Hindi laging ganyan yung nangyayari. Ha? Instead, focus on effect size and uncertainty. Ask, how big is the effect? Is it practically meaningful? Ganon. So you need to ask more, no? So the effect tells you whether it matters or not also. Uh, that's why you have to check also. You have to check, no? You have to check how large is this effect in practical terms. A statistical significant 2% improvement might be trivial. An insignificant 30% trend might be meaningful but underpowered. Focus on effect size. The Cohen's D, odd ratios, R squared. This is research statistics already. Uh, and then also consider interpreting uncertainty, confidence intervals, credible intervals. Communicate uncertainty around estimates. So you have to check whether confidence intervals exclude meaningful values, no? Or Bayesian credible intervals have a more intuitive interpretations even. So you have to consider that also, no? So instead, focus on effect size and uncertainty. As I was saying, ask how big is the effect? Is it practically meaningful? Is there a confidence or credible interval that tells me how precise this estimate is? Yun. Next, as model assumptions are also important. Were diagnostics checked? Did they test robustness with alternative specifications? Are model fit indices reported? These are important. And then also become visually literate. No? Visually literate. Uh, Figures can clarify or deceive. Look out for truncated axes, cherry-picked windows, misleading scales, or missing error bars. Honest figures display data transparently, showing both signal and uncertainty. Interpreting results. Be careful. Be careful. This is what we call figure forensics. Pick a paper with two graphs. For each, write a new caption, state the claim, report key numbers, note uncertainty, and list caveats. Compare your captions to the authors. Did they exaggerate? Did they omit crucial qualifiers? Did they omit crucial qualifiers? Next, literature mapping. No? So we're still looking at what are the things you consider when you're reading a paper. No? What are the things you have to pay attention to when reading a paper? You don't just read and accept because it's published. No, because it is published. No, uh, there has to be more than that. No, there has to be more than that. Now we arrive at synthesis. Individual papers are important, necessary even, but they are never sufficient. No? Uh, they're insufficient even. A researcher's real power is turning a pile of PDFs into patterns and gaps. This is where you move from being a contributor, a consumer, being a consumer to being a contributor, something to pay attention to. Okay? Uh, so, what are the different synthesis techniques? There are a lot. No? There are a lot. So, concept matrices, papers as rows, concepts or methods as columns, quickly reveal concentrations and even absences, concept matrices. Citation network graphs, who cites whom, what schools of thought exist, what clusters form. Evidence gap maps, two-dimensional grids, intervention versus population, showing understudied areas will come to fore. Or the Prisma flow charts, no? Systematic transparency about what you included, excluded, and why, no? The point is this, no? The point is this. Writing becomes easy when your synthesis is visible. Topic sentences come directly from clusters you've mapped. Gaps emerge from empty cells. Figures flow from matrices. So choose, for example, 6 papers. Plot them on a 2 by 2 grid. Methodological rigor on the x-axis. Effect consistency on the y-axis. Where do they cluster? Which quadrants are empty? What gaps does this pattern reveal? And then try to identify the gap. The gap. What we've done so far is to show you how to consume a paper. Let's look at some tools and workflows. Tools and workflows. So none of these matters if you can't sustain it, I'll tell you already. Reading and writing are long games, and you need a system. There are 3 essential categories of tools. One, reference managers, PDF annotation tools, and knowledge bases. Reference managers, Zotero, Mendeley, EndNote, Paperpile, and a lot more. They store, they tag, and they cite references or literature. PDF annotation tools, Hypothesis, Liquid Text, Acrobat, Highlight and Comment. with reuse in mind. Knowledge bases, Obsidian, Notion, Rome connect ideas bi-directionally, building a personal web of knowledge. So there are many options, in fact, and I've only identified a few. Now, of course, there has to be an essential workflow practice. Some practices that can help you ingrain your understanding. One, enter metadata immediately. Don't fix citations later. Do it immediately. Use cite while you write plugins. Color code highlights by functions, findings, methods, definitions, and gaps. Write atomic notes with bank links, one idea per note, and back up everything redundantly. I cannot help but emphasize backup because if something fails, oh my God, redundancy is just non-negotiable. Then plan. Plan. Uh, establish a weekly cadence. This is also what we will do with writing uh, this afternoon. Monday, plan reading, set targets. Tuesday to Thursday, layered reading, deep dives. Friday, synthesis session, update your maps. Extract sentences, draft one artifact, and integrate notes into outlines and manuscripts as you move along. No? That's how it should be, di ba? Share reference libraries, no? Your conversion control for writing, you can also do that, no? So sketch your workflow. How do PDFs arrive? Where do you store them? How do you annotate them? Where do you where do your notes live? How do you turn them into syntheses? Exchange with a partner? Is it do you exchange it with a partner or not? Is it realistic, sustainable, output oriented? No. Uh, Last point before the conclusion. Reading to writing. No. Um, finally, finally, the transition from reading to writing. This is where most people stall. But if you've done the work, triaging, multi-pass reading, critical appraisal, mapping and workflow design, writing should feel almost inevitable. Remember, the best cure for writer's block is thorough reading. When you know the field deeply, you see what's missing. And that missing piece is your contribution. That missing piece is your contribution. So there are many types of scholarly contributions: empirical, methodological, theoretical, replication, and negative results. These are all scholarly contributions. Uh, so types of contributions include empirical findings, as I've said, methodological advances, theoretical frameworks, and the like. Uh, to frame it, use gap statement formulas. Known, what we already agreed on. Unknown, what is missing or contested. Why it matters, the consequence of the gap. How you'll address it, your approach. This formula transforms reading into writing. Every literature review should follow this rhythm. let's look now at your last activity. Choose one gap you've identified. Draft a 6-bullet outline for a review section. Why the topic matters, what is established, where debate lies, your gap, your contribution, your roadmap, and then ask yourself, is there really a gap? Or does your contribution flow logically or not? Logically or not? As we close, let's return to the mantra. No read, no write. Today, we have walked through the full chain. Reading as the foundation of writing, strategic reading by paper anatomy, discovery and triage, multi-pass reading and active notes, appraising evidence critically, interpreting results responsibly, mapping the literature into patterns, building sustainable workflows, and translating gaps into contributions. The rule of the thumb: if you ever feel stuck writing, it's because you haven't read enough or you haven't synthesized what you've read. Reading is the generator of ideas, the shaper of arguments, the source of confidence. So as you leave here, commit to paying your reading debt weekly. May utang ka. And every week with a tangible artifact. A table, a figure, a paragraph. Step by step, reading transforms into writing, and writing eventually becomes contribution. Thank you very much for listening to this pre-recorded lecture this morning, and I'll see you in a synchronous class as it is scheduled in the Canvas page. Maraming salamat at magandang araw po muli.